Well, everyone, we'll get started. And as people join, this will be recorded, so you can always listen back. But I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Ultimate Combo, Safer Releases with Feature Flags and Error Monitoring. I'm Leah Hansen from Split, and today we're focusing on how to do safer releases and also detecting release-related errors for peace of mind and perhaps even a moment of relaxation for you. Hosting our webinar today, we have Neil Manvar from Sentry and Kevin Lee from Split. Neil is currently a solutions engineering manager at Sentry. He was previously at Sauce Labs and Yahoo. And at Yahoo, Neil contributed to various mail features. He was actually one of the first engineers to set up Yahoo Mail's continuous delivery build infrastructure and pipelines. And he worked to develop an automated functional testing framework. Kevin Lee is a product manager here at Split. He's focused on the data platform and core operating environment. And prior to finding his current home and product, he had roles in sales, solution engineering, software engineering, and customer success. So it's a pleasure to have you both here today. I'm going to hand it over to Kevin so we can dive right in.
Thanks, Leah, for that great introduction. So where we'll kick it off today is a quick walkthrough of the Split platform and feature flagging in general. Before we dive in, if you think about Split, we call ourselves a feature delivery platform. So that's everything that you think about in terms of controlling the release of any of your features, SDKs across 10 different languages to manage each of your releases. So that's one of our main pillars there on the left. And then we have some other components built into the platform called Monitor and Experiment. Today we'll be focusing on some of those monitor components and how that integrates directly in with Sentry. So as we think about feature flagging, and just to talk about that at a very basic level, what that really means is that we give you the ability through a web UI to control the release of any of your features separate from the code deploy of that feature. So as you push out any of your features and you release it into production, you have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and use Split to say that this feature is going to be off for all of my customers. So what we're looking at right now is the page for a Split. This is really the core object that you'd interact with within our platform. And you can see here, I have a quick description. Say if we pretend that we have a basic store, we're gonna roll out a new product, a new wrench product line today, and actually take a look at what that looks like. So today, we can see that we have a simple online hardware store that sells nails and hammers. And we're going to use Split to go ahead and say, maybe I wanna turn that feature on for all of my customers. So I can go ahead and turn that to on there via the default rule, hit save. Generally, we ask that you put in a quick comment there. So I'm just going to say rolling out new wrench and hit commit there. As soon as I've done that, we can come over here to back to my online hardware store, and we're going to see that that wrench automatically appears. So really, that's really all that is built in terms of thinking about how you release each of your features, really separating that concept of a code deploy from that feature release. Now, beyond a simple on-off, just a couple other things to call out is that you have the capability to do other things like, hey, maybe I want to target each of my features in a specific way. Maybe I only want to turn it on for my customers in New York. I can target by location, and I can also do things like whitelist by specific users. So I could say, maybe I want to whitelist just Kevin into the on version of the feature or the off version of the feature as I'm thinking about the release, rather than just do it via a simple on-off. So obviously there's much more to go into from a feature flagging perspective and how you might target the release of any given feature. But those are some of the really basic concepts of what a feature flag is and how you can use Split to release any of your features to your customers without having to perform a code deploy. So I'll kick it over to Neil from here to take a quick walkthrough of Sentry.
All right. Thanks for that warm introduction, Kevin. So what Sentry is application error monitoring for all the different stacks. So here you see just a few of them that we offer. The point being is we have SDKs in all the various platforms. What happens here is we attach the global error handler. That the SDK here is denoted by Raven, which is what we used to call in the past, now called Sentry SDK. In this case, it's I'm going to be showcasing JavaScript. It's Sentry JavaScript or Sentry browser here. As I mentioned, we'll attach to any of the global error handlers provide you a way to get errors and exceptions up to us, as well as any other information you want to explicitly send up. But the point being is when an error happens, that gets shot up to our service as an event. This will contain all the information such as stack trace tags, all the other context. We'll aggregate it based on stack trace, and you can customize any of this behavior. The point here is that we want similar errors grouped up so that we can understand the total impact of it, that this error happened X amount of times, affecting X amount of users on this browser and so forth. Once that's accomplished, any of the alert rules and conditions within our platform will be triggered according to what you've set there. So what I mean by this is you'll have an error in your browser that gets shot up to Sentry, and then you might have an alert rule that says for every new error, alert me accordingly, or when an error spikes up, PagerDuty me, etc. At that point, now that you know your code is broken, you likely then want to go into our platform, and we'll give you the who, what, when, where, why, so that you can understand the ins and outs of the error. At that point, if the error is actionable and impactful, meaning it's something to do with your source code, you likely want to get to fixing it. So rather than just kind of blindly digging around to see what went out, what changes were made, we have a source code management integration. So we have the stack trace, coupling that with the change set information provided by our source code management partners. We can identify the commit that likely introduced that issue, and therefore we can figure out who was the author of it and is the one best equipped to fight this fire. With that being said, we can then roll forward and get back to a stable state. So real quick, just want to give a quick demo here. Looking into the code, you just have to import our SDK. And once imported, initialize it with your DSN. And here you can see that's a unique key. We want errors to be shot up to sentry.io and the project ID of the project there. Once that's done, errors will then be shot up. So here's the application. As Kevin mentioned earlier, we're gonna do some we're gonna add a new feature here. Specifically, we're gonna add wrenches in, but let's see what happens when we have an error, just a basic error. So here I click checkout, there was an error, and then real time on Slack, I'm going to be alerted that my code is broken. You should probably, and I should investigate and probably go fix it. So here we see the Slack alert. We can take some actions from within here. We have some information, but if we want to know more, we go click into it, and that takes us to the Sentry issue. Here we see error type, error message, how many times the error happened, how many users were impacted. We have some aggregate metrics on the right-hand side. Going down underneath, any tag introduced into our system will basically produce heat maps so that we can understand that this has been in our code for quite some time and only happening to this type of customer on this browser. You can iterate through all of these errors, see exactly what was going on. But the point here is you have all the details. If you know anything about the stack trace, you can then figure out what to do from there. We'll even tell you what happened prior to hitting the error. So here I hit the checkout button, there was an error, and any other information we can surface, we'll do so if it helps the developer, and any other information you want to attach, and you might have seen customer type earlier, you can also do so. So here's the cart so I understand what's going on. And my favorite feature, will show you the commit that likely introduced this issue so that we can assign directly to that individual who will then go fix it because they know something about it. So that's a little quick demo of Sentry. Now I just want to kick it back to Kevin so we can really combine these two things and then really see how they play together to enable you to do iterative development and get feedback as soon as possible and make decisions from there.
All right, so thanks, Neil. So really all that goes into connecting the two platforms is hitting a few buttons in Sentry and then plugging in some of that data that you have from Sentry directly into Split. So from the Sentry integrations page, all you have to do is hit install here, hit accept and install, and you're going to want to copy and paste this installation ID over into Split. I've gone ahead and pre-populated a fair amount of that information into our integration here, just so that we're not spending too much time plugging all of that in. But you can see we're just going to do some simple data mapping of environments and identifiable identity information about user IDs. And then you'll need to plug in that installation ID and some of that Sentry org information to go ahead and set up that Sentry integration. Now, once you've gone ahead and done that, all you have to do, well, once you've gone ahead and done that, you're basically done. All those Sentry exceptions that we saw in Neil's org are automatically going to start pumping into Split, and you'll see that full log of all of that data pumping in here. And you can always click into any of those to see any of the extra metadata about that exception data. Now, the main key point here is that you're not actually going to use this exception data sort of error by error. That's really what Sentry is for. What Split focuses on more is thinking about how do we measure things like exception rates across all of your users. So completing that story is really thinking about, okay, how do we think about the idea that within Split, as we're rolling out any of our features, we have this concept of a metric. And we want to have the ability then to say, I want to understand if the number of Sentry exceptions per account is going up or down. So generally we want that to decrease. We want number of Sentry exceptions to go down, and we measure that per account, and we can measure that as a count of events. When you think about metrics, we also have the ability to think about that from an average of event values, sum of event values, so that would be things like load times or checkout of values. But today we're going to focus really just on the number of events coming across per account for each Sentry exception. From there, once you've defined a metric, you also have the capability to define what we call an alert policy. So what we have here is the idea of a Sentry exception rate alert. So if the Sentry exception rate goes up when you start releasing any of your features, you can say within a given environment, I want to know if there was a relative difference. You can also say absolute difference. We'll stick with relative difference today of say 5%, or really whatever threshold matters most to you as you think about understanding what is a rate that, something that you want your team to look at across all of your different Sentry exceptions that are coming across. And then you can choose to notify a specific set of people, or you could say just type in a specific set of emails if there's a specific listserv that you might want to alert when that occurs. Now, once you've gone ahead and set up that alert policy, you can go ahead and release each of your features in whatever way makes the most sense for you. So as you go to set up any of your releases, let's hop over here to another Split where I know I've actually populated an alert. What you might do is you might say, hey, I'm going to start releasing this feature, say to 10% of my users, and 90% are going to see off. And I can go ahead and click over to alerts to see any of that data that might be firing when I'm going ahead and doing that release. But now you can see that when we come over here, we'd see all that information about any alerts that are firing and really what is the difference that we noticed. So you can see here, if we had a metric baseline value, say 99 errors per account, and that went up to 130, that's obviously an impact of 23% against the baseline. So of course that's a much higher above that 5% threshold that we might have set. And that's why we fire that alert. And we have a big red banner here prompting you to go ahead and kill that feature. So you want to hit kill here, type in kill again, because you want to make sure you're really sure, type in a comment and hit kill. And that moves all of your customers back to that safe state. So coming back to that example of the wrench, say that wrench product line that you rolled out had some nasty bugs tied to it. You might not be sure just yet on what is the problem. You might not have had a chance to roll out that fix. But what Split allows you to do is go ahead and move all your customers to a safe state and then go back and troubleshoot within Sentry to figure out what might have gone wrong so you can quickly release a fix to your customers and get that wrench product newly released to all your customers. So I think that covers off on everything we wanted to walk through today in terms of leveraging Split and Sentry together.
So Kevin, quick question. What would the flow be here? Like, let's say, we just to kind of recap and kind of go over this end to end. We introduced the wrench product line, right? Let's say it appears and you then feature flip it to some amount of users and errors come in. You mind walking us through that process?
So within Split, you'd have the ability to go ahead and kill the feature, hit that kill button, and then you'd want to come back over to Sentry to take a look at any of those issues. I don't have the Sentry UI pulled up though.
So Kevin, as you showed us, the error rate would rise up, and we have the appropriate field set and split. We can see these coming in. We can see that this new bucket or this new feature that we released is causing a problematic behavior. At that point, I assume you or the product manager, the lead engineer could choose to kill that bucket. And if we wanted to debug further, that's potentially when the engineer would come into Sentry, look in here, and then roll forward, roll backwards. So is it pretty accurate saying the workflow would be something like, new errors come in, you're alerted, either kill the bucket depending on the severity and the behaviors and the impact, and if not, you would have developers kind of triage that issue in Sentry and focus on there. You mind kind of commenting on that?
Yeah, exactly, Neil. Once you go ahead and hit that kill switch within Split, you really want to come back to, you're going to really want to come back to Sentry to take a quick look at understanding what commit might have actually caused that issue.
All right, so thank you for that. Thanks, sorry about that. Kevin and Neil, it was great to see how those work together, the systems work together. Before we jump into Q&A, could you just share with us just a summary of takeaways for our attendees today? And Kevin, I'll hand that off to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Leah. At a high level, I think if we remove ourselves from Split and Sentry, a big part of how we've been thinking about modern software development is that we see companies using feature flags and error monitoring at a much higher rate, right? Feature flags giving engineering teams the ability to separate that concept of code deploy from feature release so that you can separately control the release of your features via a UI or something that's separated out from all those CI/CD processes you have today, and really give your engineers and product managers the power to release a feature when it makes the most sense, and not have that be dependent on all the code deploy processes that engineers follow today. Additionally, when we think about error monitoring, you have that concept of, I want to be able to understand immediately if a new issue has arisen with any new release that I have, as well as be able to identify, as Neil showed us, a code commit that might have caused an issue. Now, where we see these two things coming together in the market today is really that you need the ability to understand with this new concept that features as they're being released aren't just going to be a big bang all on for everyone. You actually have a new state where you're only going to be pushing out a new feature to say 1% or 5% of your users. And you want to have the ability to understand and compare the new variant or the fact that these 5% of your customers are seeing a new feature versus the other 95% of your users, and understand if there's some type of high level degradation between those two. And you have that new ability now because of feature flags, and then you want to combine that with error monitoring to really dig in to understand the differences between those two variants in real time. And that's really the biggest difference that you see today with modern software development teams, being able to speed up that measurement process rather than having to just sort of do a backwards looking comparison, when honestly, for most of our customers, that's too late, right? You've already turned it on for everyone. So being able to get that error monitoring on that small subset of your customers is really the sort of new superpower we're seeing a lot of our customers and different members of the market really tapping into today.
Thanks, Kevin. I think we have this other slide here as well.
Yeah, I think the last piece to touch on there is just thinking about, and what we saw today specifically within Split and Sentry, is really focused on detection and remediation. So Sentry, for those of you that already use it, obviously has those great capabilities to notify you of any net new exceptions coming across. And then Split gives you that extra capability to understand if there are exception rate increases for any new flag treatments, right? So again, for that 5% versus that 95% when you're thinking about that new versus old variant of your features. And then if you think about remediation, with Split, you then have the ability to say, okay, hey, if that 5% is experiencing a degraded experience, let me immediately kill that feature and move them back to a safe state, while I then go sign into Sentry and identify that problem commit while I know that my customers are in a safe state, and roll roll out a fix for that issue as soon as possible.
Great, and thanks, Kevin. And Neil, did you want to add something here as well? Neil, you might be muted.
Can you, is this better?
Yep, there you are, Neil. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so just to piggyback on Kevin's point, the earlier you find issues, you know, when you're pushing out to a subset of production, the cheaper it is for you, your users, the customers, the developers, the whole organization. So, you know, with Split and Sentry, we can push out a feature, get that feedback that, you know, things aren't right or things are right, and then iterate accordingly with kind of minimal impact to all parties here. So that's kind of the high level takeaway from my end.
Great, thank you. And we are going to open it up to some questions now that we've taken from the audience. I'm going to start with one which came in, which is how much data or limits on the projects they can link from Sentry to Split. So I don't know if you want to take that, Kevin, and then comment on it, Neil, if there's anything to that.
Yeah, so the way you quickly saw it in the demo was that the way the integration is set up is per project, but there aren't any limits to how many projects in Sentry that you can link up to Split. So if you think about UI, backend, mobile, all the different ways you might be leveraging Sentry to monitor your errors, you can link all of those projects or essentially types of SDKs you're using with Sentry over to Split to use for monitoring in terms of error rates across your entire stack. So short answer, no, there aren't any limits.
Great, thank you. We have another one. Can we limit the error to a particular channel in Sentry? I think that's over to you, Neil.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So you can have as many projects in Sentry, and projects have alert rules, and in those alert rules, you can specify the condition and action. The action would be essentially, I want to be notified in this channel in Slack, or I want to be notified via PagerDuty, and so forth. So, and the conditions would be, you know, when an error spikes up or there's a new error. So just to recap, the answer is yes. This would be configured in the alert rules part of the Sentry project.
Great, thank you. Another question is, can we automate a kill switch after a threshold is hit?
Answer is not today, but I think you've touched on and are guessing at the really main next step we're looking to build on top of the integration here in terms of as you think about the monitoring and alerting capabilities. As soon as a threshold is hit, we're thinking about building in those rules to auto kill any features that might cause an alert. We're being really careful with that, obviously, because anytime a system is changing your customer experience for you, we're trying to make sure we build in all the proper checks and balances there to make sure we're not doing wrong by any of our customers' customers. So not today, but definitely something we're looking at from a road mapping perspective.
Great, thank you. Someone else wants to know if they can see a Split feature flag data in Sentry issues. I think that's to Kevin.
Yeah, so again, that's something we're looking at from a partnership perspective. Obviously, this was really the first step between Sentry and Split as we work on bringing these two platforms together. And we're trying to think about, okay, hey, you already have the concept of commits and releases within Sentry. How do we integrate the concept of a feature flag variant into the Sentry UI? But again, that's something we're also scoping and thinking about from a road mapping perspective as well. All great questions.
Great, and we have a lot of questions coming in, which is wonderful. Please keep them coming. If we can't get them to them all today, we'll certainly send out answers after this webinar. Just a few more. I think, what are the different ways that Split can measure and notify me based on Sentry data?
So the most common things we see there, and we saw one today, which was sort of the concept of, as Sentry data comes in, I want to be measuring the average number of Sentry errors that I'm getting per user. So that was the metric we looked at today. But some of the other most common one we see is what percentage of my users are getting a Sentry or getting at least one Sentry exceptions, right? So I want to make sure that most of my users are at an exception rate of 0, and I want to know if a specific new feature variant I'm pushing out might be increasing the percentage of users that are having at least one exception. So those are the most common that we see, but there are a number of other ways that might make more sense to walk through in depth later on. If there's other pieces you want to talk in, so we can definitely reach out after.
Great, thanks, Kevin. This is, I think, for Neil. Is there a way to share alert rules across projects, or do you always have to redefine the same rule for each project separately?
Yeah, currently the case is as mentioned, where alert rules are tied to a project, but we're actually working on something to make this a lot easier and kind of move up alert rules to a little bit of a higher level, as well as introduce a bunch of new alerting functionality. So just stay tuned. We understand where you're coming from, and we plan to address that.
Great. I think we'll just do one more. And again, feel free to keep sending in your questions, and then we'll, if we can't get to them, we will answer afterwards. But someone wanted to know just the requirements they are for making sure the Sentry split integration can properly work. So I don't know if Kevin, Neil, you both want to answer to that, but I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab. So from a split perspective, obviously you'll want to be on our platform edition and on Sentry. Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this integration requires the business plan. And then in terms of just actual implementation, from a Sentry side, since it's data flowing from Sentry to split, there are a couple of pieces of how you use Sentry in your code that would be required. One would be to make sure you're always logging the environment to Sentry for where an error is occurring, as well as a user ID. As we think about measuring and comparing feature variants, we always need to know, okay, hey, which user saw on, which user saw off, and that's via the user ID. And then so we want to understand, did this user ID also receive an error? And then we're able to attribute that to the on or the off version, and that's how we're able to provide that alerting functionality. So it would be, just to recap, the user ID as well as an environment identifier for any of the exceptions you're logging within Sentry. And then it's really just a matter of clicking a few buttons to get that set up, assuming you're on the business and platform editions of Sentry and Split.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, exactly what Kevin mentioned. You got to set the appropriate context so Split knows what's going on and can make sense of it. And kind of to link this back to an earlier question as well, if there's anything that you want to appear onto the Sentry UI, go ahead and set it as a tag. That's exactly what we're doing here with environment and user, and everything should then flow through and be set as context.
Thanks, Neil. And there's a lot of other questions too. We'll answer those, but to stay on track and to our timeline, we're gonna go to something fun, which is our safety kit winner that we promised that we were going to announce. So thank you first to Neil and Kevin for that. Thank you everyone for putting up with my technical glitch there. But I hope you found this webinar helpful. So now we'll announce the winner of our safety release kit. It's going to include some fun swag, but also a $100 Amazon gift card. And actually, Sentry and Split decided to give out 2 kits. So the winners that we drew are Matthew and Pritish. So we'll be reaching out to Matthew and Pritish with more details, but congratulations on winning those kits. And actually for everyone else who attended today, if you would like some Sentry bath bombs, a Split t-shirt, and some other fun swag, just enter your mailing address in the follow-up email that we're going to send out shortly. It will also include a link to the recording of this webinar and also more answers to the questions that we received that we didn't have time to get to today. But look out for that in your inbox, and you can also have some relaxation on your own time. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you Neil at Sentry and Kevin at Split. And everyone have a great day.